Welcome again to those who've joined for the Juris Doctor Masterclass, defining a crime. It's a thing that's a really interesting topic. It's something that I teach in my criminal law unit. Now, I wanted to start too by introducing myself briefly, just so you know who I am. I'm Dr. Andrew Burke. I'm a lecturer here at Macquarie Law School. I am a Macquarie graduate myself. I did my law degree, undergraduate law degree with a science degree back in the 1990s after I left school here at Macquarie. I've then been out and I've been a practicing solicitor for a number of years, including in criminal defence. I was a criminal defence lawyer in private practice for some time. Had a firm where we did the full range of criminal matters, everything from traffic kind of fines through to murder and everything in between. So I had that practitioner background. I've done a Master's of Law then at University of Sydney before coming back here to Macquarie. I've done a PhD in sentencing, in criminal law sentencing, and I've now been nearly 6 years as a full-time member of staff. Now, I convene and teach the unit called Criminal Justice. That is a first-year unit for almost all JD students. So you'll have me in your first or second semester, almost certainly, and tonight's class is taking one small, very tiny part of that unit and taking it in a particular direction that's suitable for you guys. But there'll be a lot more of this type of content once we get there. Now, it's such a great question too, defining crime. What is crime? Because at first it seems like the most obvious question in the world. Everybody knows what crime is, right? Like even little kids know what crime is. It's like hitting people and stealing stuff and killing people. Like we all know that, right? So it seems so obvious. But the more you think about it, and what I would hope you guys get out of this is that the more you think about it, the more you realize actually what a very complicated question it is, right? What a very complicated and open-ended question it is. And yes, those things I mentioned are totally crimes, obviously. Killing people, punching people, stealing stuff. They're absolutely crimes. But there's thousands of other crimes, many of which I'm sure you've never heard of. There's all sorts of different crimes. Parliament loves making new crimes. They do it all the time. And they very rarely get around to repealing the old ones. So there's always new crimes coming up. But even those things like murder that you would think, oh, well, that's the most obvious crime of all, murder, and something common to all cultures, murder. I'm going to explore a little bit how even that isn't always quite so certain. The other thing about crime is that what should be a crime reflects our society's understanding, and our society's understanding changes. Right? It changes over time because our values change over time, simply because they evolve or because the composition of our society changes in different ways. For example, homosexuality, or more specifically, sodomy, was a crime in all Australian states until as recently as the 1980s. The 1980s, it's not that long ago. I remember the 1980s. Some of you probably do too. Lots of my students don't, but I do. It's not that long ago. Now we have the legalisation of same-sex marriage. Our society has come an astonishingly long way on that topic in only 30 or 40 years. Right? So it's gone something to being, it's been a crime, to being legalisation of same-sex marriage. So our understanding of this, and that's just one small example, changes very quickly over time. Now, the quote that you can see on the screen is sort of the classic technical black letter law definition of what is crime, right? If you ask a lawyer what is crime, they'll come up with something like this. And this is the key case. It's from the Privy Council, which is the House of Lords. Now, you might know in Australia, we have a High Court as our highest court. Until sometime in the 80s and 90s, I forget which, you could actually appeal from the High Court to the Privy Council and the House of Lords. It's part of Australia's very gradual shift towards becoming a republic that we abolished appeals to the House of Lords from the High Court. But this, obviously, in 1931, in this case, that was the House of Lords was still Australia's highest court. So the criminal quality of an act cannot be, so it's a bit pompous because it's the House of Lords, cannot be discerned by intuition, nor can it be discovered by any standard, but one is the act prohibited by penal consequences. In other words, a crime is just what Parliament says it is. It has no other defining characteristic, no moral dimension, no rationale that ties together all the different crimes. It's just what Parliament says it is. So you want to make sure you vote sensibly for good people, because they could make anything a crime, anything they want. Parliament could pass the law to say that being left-handed is a crime. To have red hair is a crime. To be called Andrew is a crime. They could if they want. It'd be ridiculous, but there's actually nothing to stop them from doing that. They can make anything a crime they wish, and that it's not by referral to any kind of objective standard or any kind of moral framework. To further make the point, I love this photo. These are freedom riders, right? Freedom riders who were civil rights activists in the United States in the 1960s, right? At the time of segregation and legal institutionalized discrimination. I love the details in these mugshots. The woman at centre top up here and this man on the far right, they sort of got that kind of like a bit of a smile on their face, like, come on, is that the best you've got? Try harder. Some of the others look very intent, very determined. And you can see that these are mugshots from Jackson, Mississippi. And you can see the dates. Americans do days and months backwards, but they're May, June, July 1961. So the Freedom Riders were, for people who are not aware, civil rights activists who travelled in buses throughout the South, challenging segregation, going to places where Black people were not allowed to go in order to draw attention to legal segregation and racism. They were frequently arrested and worse, beaten by police and by white vigilantes. Their bus was firebombed. They were subjected to a torrent of abuse, which they did and they knew was going to come. And it was part of the publicity, it was part of bearing witness, right, to draw attention to the law. The man at very top left up here is John Lewis, who went on to lead a distinguished career in Congress and died only last year. John Lewis was the man, if you're aware of the history, who led the famous march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where they were set upon by 600 state troopers with dogs, and he suffered broken bones in the beatings that were administered. My broader point being that these people, every person on that screen was a criminal. I mean, they're literally mugshots, right? They were literally criminals of the day. But today we think of them as visionaries, as heroes, as people to look up to, of heroes of the civil rights movement. Again, the enormous change, and making the point that what is criminal is sometimes political. I mean, sorry, what is made criminal is sometimes political, and that governments are not above criminalising dissent, criminalising troublemakers or opposition figures. Make the point a bit further. All the people on the screen and plus more, the bust there is Socrates. We don't have photos of Socrates because there won't be cameras, but there are statues of him. And look, it's worth noting that some of the major figures in history, including everybody on this screen, have fallen foul of the criminal law at one point or another. Socrates, here the statue there, was sentenced to death for the crime of corrupting youths, which he did by teaching them the power of independent thought. Martin Luther King, the bottom right, spent time in prison for civil disobedience. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison for the crime of trying to overthrow the state. Gandhi was charged with sedition over his peaceful campaign against the British occupation of India. Not on the screen, but suffragettes who picketed outside the White House for the right to vote were arrested for obstructing traffic. Oscar Wilde, bottom left, one of England's great authors and wits, he did hard time for the crime of sodomy because Oscar Wilde was gay. Similarly, Alan Turing, the father of computer science, who was pivotal in breaking the Enigma code in World War II, leading to the Allied victory, was charged with indecency for his romantic relationship with another man. And one of my personal heroes, Muhammad Ali, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for refusing to be drafted to fight in Vietnam, although he never actually served a day of that time. Now, all of these people were criminals at one point in their lives, but they're some of the most revered figures in history. Again, what does that tell you about what criminal law is and what it means? How much it changes over time, how much it's dependent upon circumstance, and how much it can be the exercise of political power, right? or majority, a majority position or viewpoint. Now, this slide is a painting. Some of you may have seen it before, be familiar with it. It's a fairly famous painting called Turner, entitled The Slave Ship. And it depicts a slave ship which was called the Zong, a real slave ship. It depicts a real event. And in 1781, this slave ship sailed from West Africa with a cargo of 470 slaves en route to Jamaica. 12 weeks later, closing in on Jamaica, the ship had already lost 60 Africans and 7 of the 17 crew to dysentery. The captain then decided to throw the remaining 6 slaves overboard. 131 slaves were thrown overboard and drowned, even though it had rained and there was plenty of water and food on board to complete the trip. Right? 131 slaves thrown overboard and drowned, which is what's depicted in this painting. It's a much sadder painting once you understand the context of what it is. Now, at this point, I want to run the first poll. I've got a number of these polls. Polls are just ways for you guys to vote, make it a little bit more interactive. So I'm going to launch this poll and you should be able to see it. Now, was that a crime? Throwing the 131 slaves overboard from the slave ship who drowned, was it a crime or not? What do you think? It doesn't matter if you're right or not. It's an interactive tool, but tell me what you think. That is close to tied as we could possibly get. Was it a crime? No, it wasn't, right? Because the slaves were not legally people. Right? It couldn't be murder because they weren't legally people. Morally, you might feel that it's a crime, and morally you would be right. But legally, no, it was not. Now, it did go to court. It did go to court, infamously, but not as a murder case. It went to court as a property and insurance case because the slaves were property and they were insured. Right? It went to court as a disputed insurance claim. And in that case, the infamous statement came from the bench that the case was legally the same as if it had been donkeys that had been thrown overboard. Well, actually, the judge said asses, which is the old-fashioned word for donkeys. Now, that's only 250 odd years ago. Now, I know that's a while, but in the scale of human history, it's a drop in a bucket, right? It's a speck of dust. Not a crime because the slaves weren't people. Again, to illustrate the flexibility of it, and to come back to, I said earlier, when you say what to people for the first time, what is crime, people tend to say, well, obviously murder. Murder is the most obvious crime. Well, here it wasn't. Right? Because they weren't legally people. So it's an important point to remember. The law is what Parliament says. It doesn't have to be based in morality, doesn't have to be based in science, doesn't even have to be based in reality. It's just what Parliament says it is, and Parliament can define certain human beings as legally people and other human beings as legally not. Now, in the present day, it's interesting to consider we still see debates, and very topical, very recent and current debates about the beginning and end of life for the purpose of criminal law. It's only about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, that New South Wales changed the abortion law so that abortion is no longer a crime. It was a crime until very recently, punishable by up to 14 years imprisonment in New South Wales to procure an abortion. Now, under the right specific circumstances set out in the Crimes Act, abortion is not a crime. Euthanasia. There is currently before the New South Wales Parliament an assisted dying bill that is going to be debated early next year, which both parties likely to have a conscience vote and may well pass. Well, that assisted dying is, in some people's eyes, murder. in some people's eyes, other people's eyes, the right thing to do on compassionate grounds. So in 2021 and in 2022, we'll still be having the debates about how the law should define what a person is for the purpose of murder. So even that one, you go, the most fundamental, obvious crime of all, killing people, common to all cultures, you might think, we're actually not, it's actually not that simple at all. It's actually hugely more complicated and contentious, and that's why it's interesting, right? That's where and why the criminal law is interesting. So, closing that poll. Moving on. What I'm going to do now is look at a number of different crimes of various varied types. Now, this is just a shot from the Blues Brothers. I've got a couple of pop culture references in this lecture because I like them and I wrote the lecture so I can. Also because it's nice to have pictures, and it can be hard to find pictures to go along with some of these things. Blasphemy. People may not fully know what blasphemy is. At its simplest level, it can be using religious terms as swear words, right? Damn. And generally, this is not considered very rude anymore. Damn, which is like part of a shortened version of damnation. You know, stub your toe. Jesus, we stub your toe. You're in pain. The one I use, maybe down to my Irish Catholic upbringing, is Jesus wept. You know, Jesus wept. Did you see what happened that time? Right? Like it's a form of emphasis. That's kind of blasphemy, right? It's using the Lord's name in vain. In a legal sense, blasphemy is a little bit more than that. It's a denigration of the Christian religion, specifically Christian, not other religions, the denigration of the Christian religion. Now, in a multicultural society in 2021, where we have people from all over the world and people of all different faiths and none, it's a bit weird, isn't it, to think there's a crime, or there has been in New South Wales, this crime. The question I want to pose to you is this still a crime today in New South Wales? Blasphemy, to denigrate the Christian religion, to say that the Bible is not true, or that God doesn't exist, or to say something heretical of that nature. So, I'm going to launch my second poll. I want to see what you guys think on this question. Is blasphemy a crime today, now in New South Wales? Okay, so got 57% said no, 43% yes. Well, guess what? It is a crime. It is a crime. You can be charged with blasphemy in New South Wales. Isn't that extraordinary? How bizarre. No one has been for a really, really long time, but there's no reason why it couldn't be. It could happen at any time. The police could decide to change their long-standing policy of ignoring this offence and charging somebody with it. Which raises another point. Why have a crime if the police are going to ignore it? Which they do. They totally pretend this doesn't exist. Does that make sense? Like, surely the crime should be what the law says it is and nothing more or less. We give police a discretion, essentially, to pretend that certain types of crime don't exist. Blasphemy is still a crime. As I said, no one's been charged for a very long time. It's what's called a common law offence. It's not written down in any statute. Now, I'm going to change my screen share very quickly here to go to what is in fact the most recent prosecution for blasphemy in New South Wales. Now, this is actually taken from the Sydney Morning Herald of 20th February 1871. So that's how long it's been since anybody's been prosecuted for blasphemy. But it's a good story. Now, I obviously don't have time to go through the whole thing, and that would not be so exciting, but I'll give you the highlights. So this William Lorando Jones was charged with blasphemy, and a jury was impaneled. They had a jury on a charge of blasphemy. And the defendant was a man advanced in years who somehow don't quite understand how this happened, but I saw on the indictment on the 22nd of January at Parramatta, this man being a wicked and evil disposed person and disregarding the laws and religion of the colony, wickedly, profanely, devisedly, and intending to bring the Holy Scriptures and the Christian religion into disrepute and contempt among the people of the said colony, and to blaspheme, they really went to town on this, and to blaspheme God unlawfully and wickedly and blasphemously in the presence and hearing of diverse subjects of our Lady the Queen, spoke and pronounced with a loud voice, published the profane and blasphemous words to the effect that the Bible is the most immoral book that has ever been published, and so on. Right? A long list of things that he's apparently said. So there was a trial that this is what he's alleged to have done. There was a prosecutor spoke, the police spoke, cutting down here. Now it's Mr. Buchanan, the defence lawyer, who I can kind of relate to being a defence lawyer. It says here, forcible and eloquent speech extending over 2 hours. 2 hours, crikey. Upheld the right of the defendant as a free subject in a free country to express his opinions on matters of religious belief, whether either public or private, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, the jury convicted him without even leaving the jury box. Like they didn't even leave the room. They convicted him, returning a verdict of guilty. His Honour remarked that he considered the case one of an extremely grave nature and would do his utmost by making an example of the defendant to prevent a repetition of such an offence. He was therefore sentenced to 2 years imprisonment in Darlinghurst Jail and inflicted a fine of £100. £100 in 1870 was a fortune, right? That was an astonishing sum of money. So it's still the law though, right? It's still the law. Somebody could still be charged for this. Right, returning to my slide. So that was blasphemy, and that is, people aren't familiar with Blues Brothers, Aretha Franklin on the slide. Now, complete change of pace. Complete change of pace. Lighter than air balloons or helium balloons, helium-filled balloons. The sort that if you let go, they float away, and little kids cry because they've lost their balloon. Helium-filled balloons. Now, people may not be aware that lighter than air balloons do in fact cause environmental problems when they come back to Earth, which they do. They usually shatter at a fairly high altitude, and then what then comes down is little bits of rubber or plastic or whatever that obviously fall on the land and in the ocean. And there are documented studies that a really significant percentage of ocean plastic pollution is actually lighter than air balloons, and it gets ingested by sea life, by fish and turtles and so on, causing problems. So it seems there is a genuine, I'm not the expert, but from what I can research, there is a genuine environmental issue with lighter than air balloons, which people might not be aware. Now, is it then in New South Wales a crime to release lighter than air balloons deliberately or with a degree of carelessness that might be punished? Okay? Might it be? There's an environmental problem there. On the other hand, probably people don't really know about it. It's not really something that people think about or is spoken about very much. So let's vote again. Do you think it's a crime to release helium-filled balloons in New South Wales? All right, another couple of seconds and I'll close it. Okay, so some of you might have seen where I was going there. Yes, it is. Do you know how many people have been prosecuted for it? No one ever has been prosecuted in New South Wales. It's been a crime for about 20 years now. No one's ever been prosecuted. I always check each semester because I mentioned this in a lecture, which raises again another big issue, right, regarding crime. Now, whenever we have a new area of human behaviour that people feel is a problem, there's always a temptation to criminalise it, make it a crime. That'll fix it. And lawyers are very much trained to think, well, all we have to do is put a new bit of writing in the Crimes Act or in some bit of legislation and problem solved. No one will ever do it again because it'll be a crime. Now, sometimes that might work, but very often it doesn't. It doesn't work with drugs, for example. Still plenty of illicit drugs around. So lawyers need to learn to think a bit more creatively about how we solve problems. But if you make something a crime like this and nobody knows and nobody's prosecuted, it's like if a tree falls in the forest. Is it really a crime? Is it really a sensible way to change anything? What we've got here is just excerpt from it's called the Protection of the Environment Operations Act. If you release 20 or more, so not just letting go of one, right? 20 or more balloons at about the same time, you are guilty of the offence of balloon release. If there's an aggravated offence, if you release more than 100 at once, you're guilty of the offence of aggravated balloon release. That one cracks me up. And that goes on your criminal record, just like everything else does, right? You'd want to travel into the United States, to tick a box, do you have a criminal record? You have to go, yep, aggravated balloon release, and explain that to the confused man in immigration. It's a criminal offence, just like any other, goes on your criminal record, nobody knows about it, no one's ever been prosecuted. Go figure. The criminal law is a strange beast. Now, next, bullying. Reference in The Office here. Around when I was into The Office, I rewatched it all, and as a lockdown project. Had a little bit of spare time and I was going a little bit mad. I really like it. But bullying, people would know, bullying, right? A huge problem in our society, in schools, in workplaces, all over the place. Anywhere that there's people, you can get bullying. And people talk about it a lot, and there's lots of campaigns and awareness around it. But is bullying in itself a crime? See what you think. Is there an offence of bullying in New South Wales? Most of you are right. 2/3 of you are right. It's not a crime, right? Now, obviously, if you punch somebody, that's an assault. But if you threaten somebody badly enough, that could be a different sort of crime. But bullying in itself is not, despite the fact that it's well accepted as being a very significant social issue. Now, why is that? Well, I guess 2 points. Firstly, it's very hard to define. You can only criminalise something if you can define it properly. Otherwise, you're just making more problems than you're solving. How do you define bullying in law? How would you create a crime that captured all the different types of bullying that can go from very obvious to very nuanced and subtle, and that can take all sorts of different forms? Secondly, I think is an interesting question about too, what should we criminalise? What should be the line? There's always going to be behaviour from human beings that is undesirable, antisocial, obnoxious. But we can't criminalise all of it, right? We can't just criminalise being an idiot, right? We can't really do that. Might be tempting sometimes, but we can't do that. So where do you draw the line between someone who's being an idiot in a way that deserves being told off but isn't a crime, and stepping over that line to something that should involve the police and courts and a criminal record? It's a very difficult question. But in terms of bullying, we're not quite there. Yeah, as I said, though, obviously, if you go a step and assault somebody or something like that, like in the schoolyard, well, that's the crime of assault. So bullying, right? Really, it's a good example of the limits of the criminal law. And if we criminalise it anyway, would it stop? Would it fix the problem? And again, that impulse of students of lawyers are meant to want to criminalise everything. What about smacking a child? Now, that picture on screen is an excerpt from, it's both a book by Christosopoulos that was then made into a TV series called The Slap. If you haven't seen it, it's very good. And it's about all the fallout from an adult smacking a child across the face at a barbecue with a group of friends and family there, and then how they cause that everything spirals from that one incident, right? And people fall out and everything else falls apart through their division as to whether this was a good thing to do. Now, some of you might have been smacked as a child. Some of you might have children and might have smacked them. When I was at high school, they caned us with a stick. We got hit with a stick. That would be a crime now. You can't do that. But back then, it was considered a desirable thing. The parents paid extra money for, right? The possibility of getting hit with a stick. In New South Wales at the moment, is it against the law to smack a child? Is it against the law to smack a child? So, got another poll here. Now this time we have another option of maybe, or it depends. So have a go. What do you think? Is it a crime? Most of you have gone with maybe, right, which is the correct answer. It is technically an assault, but there's what's called a defence of lawful correction. The law in New South Wales is that you are allowed to smack a child. There's a defence of what's called lawful correction, as long as you comply with the quite detailed requirements that are in the Crimes Act. How many people understand all these requirements? I wager almost nobody. You have to be either the parent or a person in the role of a parent, and that's defined like a step-parent, grandparent, and so on, who's been left in charge. It cannot cause more than momentary pain, right? So you can, no more than momentary pain. It cannot be to the head or neck. And it has to be a level of force that is proportionate to the circumstances. So the age and maturity of the child and the gravity of what the child has done wrong. Okay? So as long as you comply with all of that, that's fine. Now, a quick smack to the bum, that is only a stings for a second. In a situation where a child's done something quite naughty, you're going to be okay. You're going to be protected by the law. You hit a child on the head, never. You said you cause long-lasting pain or some kind of bruise, no, that's going to be a crime. Okay? Or if you fly off the handle at a very, very trivial act of bad behaviour and smack, again, that's likely to be a crime. Now, another point to make about that, of course, is who's going to know? Who's going to call the cops? Your child probably isn't going to call the cops on you. They don't know how. They don't know they can. Unless the neighbour calls or another adult in the house calls, again, we can criminalise things or not, but it's only as good as the enforcement or the realisation amongst the public the law actually exists. Now, this is my last one. That's a picture of a waratah, which is the New South Wales state flower. Beautiful flower, right? It's there in the little New South Wales emblem, the stylised waratah. I like waratahs too, so I picked this beautiful photo of waratahs. You might find yourself sometimes walking down the street or through a park, and you might see some beautiful flowers, like a waratah. I'm not talking about in your own garden. I'm talking about in a public place or in somebody else's garden. And you might see that beautiful flower and think, there's plenty of flowers, no one around, not doing any harm. I'd like that flower. And you pick that flower and you take it with you. You take it home, or you use it in some way, or you give it to somebody. Maybe you're running late for Mother's Day and you forgot to get a gift, and so you lift a few flowers off and give them to mum. Don't do that, but maybe that's what you do. Is that a crime? Right? I'm talking about in your own garden. I'm talking about in a public place or from somebody else's garden to pick a single flower. Let's go for our final poll here. Picking a flower. Is that a crime in New South Wales? Yes, the great majority of you got this correct. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But here, the excerpt from the Crimes Act, only if the value of the article stolen exceeds $2. Now, how are you supposed to work out that a flower is worth more than $2? I don't know. The offence here you can see is much broader, destroys or steals the whole or any part of any tree, sapling, shrub, plant, or any underwood growing in any places you can read, which includes breaking off a branch or breaking off a single flower, but it's got to be worth more than $2. Again, how do you know? How's that enforced? How do the cops work out? Well, that's a rose, so that's probably like $5. That's just like a daisy, so we're calling that 50 cents. Do they know? But yes, that picking a flower is a crime, even though many of us might have done it at one point or another. Now, that brings my little presentation to a bit to an end. If you want to find out more about the Juris Doctor, there's obviously that link there on the screen, or you can scan that QR code to go for a personal consultation, right, which might be useful. You can also, I'll tell you, I'm also, I should have mentioned at the beginning, the director of our Juris Doctor course, right? So I'm responsible for the Juris Doctor course for the law school. You can also email me questions if you think of them later on. It's just email address for academics is easy. Andrew.Burke, B-U-R-K-E, @mq.edu.au. Or you can, if you forget it, just Google me, Dr. Andrew Burke, MQ, it'll come up. But Andrew.Burke @mq.edu.au, or you can scan the QR code. Now, just looking at the chat, if anybody has any questions about what it's like to study at Macquarie, anything about what I've said tonight, obviously, or any other question about what it's like to do a JD, thanks, my email address has been put in the chat as well. What you study, how the study works, feel free to ask now. Raise your hand or chat the question if you're feeling a bit too shy. Question, why are the laws such as blasphemy not repealed? Good question. Good question. I don't know. I think there's just no urgency because no one's prosecuted for it, so there's no pressing issue. But people are much more likely, Parliament's much more likely to create new crimes than they are to go through and check and go, oh, well, should we still have this one? They don't tend to do that. It tends to be much more reactive, driven by events. You know, something's on the front page of the Daily Telegraph or on Talkback Radio, something must be done, so they create a new crime. They're much happier doing that than getting rid of the old ones. Does law school help graduates find jobs? Well, good question. Look, to a degree, the university does as well. There's a careers hub where employers will post job ads. MOLS, the Macquarie University Law Society, is a wonderful organisation. It's a student organisation, the biggest on campus of law students. They organise a number of career type events, career fairs, where big employers will come here with have stalls, or that they've had online versions, of course, too, during the pandemic, to try to connect students with employers. And they have other things as well to promote getting jobs. We have a PACE unit, professional and community engagement, where you do a unit in the workforce to get some experience and to make some contacts. And then in less formal ways through LinkedIn and so on, try to promote and connect people. So obviously, ultimately, the responsibility is the students to find out, to go to the events, to join MOLs, to see them on Facebook, find out about things and go to it and sign up and put yourself forward, make a CV and so on. But there is support in doing that. The entry-level salary for graduates. Well, how long's a piece of string? Hey, the thing about law, for starters, not everybody who does a law degree actually becomes a lawyer. It is a generalist qualification these days that will help you with public service, journalism, corporate careers, all sorts of things. In the legal profession itself, it is enormously diverse. And that's one of the things I often say to recommend it. There is a niche of the legal industry for every person and every skill set. You can be like I used to be, working for Legal Aid in court literally every single day, on your feet, arguing cases, usually for people who've got no money on Legal Aid. Or you can work in the big end of town doing tax for multinationals and never see the inside of a courtroom. Now, the tax for multinationals pays a lot more money than doing legal aid for people without any. So different parts of the legal industry pay quite different salaries. You can be a public sector lawyer. Every government department or agency has a legal team. The salaries there are still good. They're still good. They're not as good as the best ones in private practice. But for example, the hours in the public sector are much more reasonable, and you'll get flexi time and maternity leave and so on much more easily. So it depends on your personal circumstance. It is important to consider when you're thinking about a career, what is most important to you. If it is money, and nothing wrong with that, not knocking that, then you would want to go a certain way. If you're more interested in something else, then you would maybe go that other way. But look, they're all good jobs. and they're all well paid compared to the average in the workforce, but it's not possible to say that there's a single entry-level graduate salary. Alex's question, doing the LLB, could you study further? Well, look, they're really equivalent degrees. Both the LLB, the Bachelor of Laws, and the Juris Doctor will enable you to be admitted to practice law. They have certain differences. Obviously, the Juris Doctor is postgraduate. You must also have a degree, already have an undergraduate degree. The Juris Doctor can be done in 3 years full-time. The Bachelor of Laws requires a minimum of 4 years full-time. But they're essentially equivalent. One of the tricks is that we cannot recognise undergraduate units towards postgraduate degrees. So if you have an incomplete Bachelor of Laws, you're much better off completing that Bachelor of Laws, because if you transfer to a Juris Doctor, you have to do those subjects again. Right? That's just a rule that's set not by us, that you can't count an undergraduate degree towards a postgraduate qualification. The other reason, I guess, to why people do a JD is maybe you don't want to sit in a room full of 18-year-olds. Not knocking the 18-year-olds. I mean, they're great. They're bright, shiny, enthusiastic young things, but perhaps you're a bit older, and the thought of being the older person in a room of 18-year-olds is less appealing than being in a JD cohort that is older and more diverse. I mean, speaking to JDs, that's what a lot of people say. Question, you're right to say the crime, no, it's not a crime if there's no complainant, it's not discovered or reported. Well, that's right. I mean, it might technically be a crime, but if no one complains, no one goes to the police, makes a report, gives a statement to give evidence, then it's never going to show up in the crime statistics and it can never make it to court. Now, we know that lots of crimes are underreported. Domestic violence, for example, sexual assault. The great majority of victims don't go to the police for whatever reason, for a wide range of reasons. So they never show up in any crime stats. Other sorts of crime, like say environmental crime. If a tree falls in the forest, if somebody commits an environmental crime and no human being witnesses it, only the environment suffers, there's no one to report it to the police. So it's not, only the only person who knows about it might be the perpetrator, and they're not going to dog themselves in. So that's right. That's right. Are we open to authoritarianism, that Parliament's in charge? Yes. Yes. It is soft norms that keep us as free and democratic as we are. Soft norms. And you saw that in Trump's America, how dangerous it was that one person could, and how easily Trump could reset some of those norms. Absolutely. Liberal democratic societies like Australia are open. There's no inherent reason why we couldn't slide towards authoritarianism if we elect the wrong people and we don't hold them to account, because Parliament can do what it likes. And so much of what we're governed by are just norms. There's nothing written down. Applications are through UAC. That's an easy one. If you do the graduate certificate, absolutely. If you do a graduate certificate and then think, gee, this is great. How good's this? I'd like to do a JD. Of course, those 4 units that you've done, you just automatically, well, not automatically go through UAC, but it articulates into the JD and you get then credit for those 4 units. You don't have to do them again. No, that would be crazy, right? Those 4 units from the graduate certificate then become part of your Juris Doctor. And it's set up that way so that you can get a taste of it with the graduate certificate, 4 units, including mine. And then if you like it, you can keep going. Okay, so we have a recommended, looking at the question from Louise here, we have a recommended study plan for both full-time and part-time that if you email me, I can provide to you. I don't have it right here, which there are prerequisites and so on, and there are certain units that you should do first. If you're working 4 days a week, I would recommend part-time, 2 or maybe 3 units. Full-time is 4 units at once. So I'd recommend 2 or at most 3 units at once, particularly if it's been a while since you've studied, to get used to it. Of course, you can try for 1 semester and see how you go, and the next semester do go up or down in terms of your level of study. But yes, if you're working 4 days a week, which is close to full-time, studying full-time as well, I would have thought would be quite demanding. And if you're not in a rush, there's probably no need to do that. Yes, the question here from Alison, are there Commonwealth supported places? Yes. as well as domestic fee paying places. It's a matter of applying, and it's then it's assessed through the admissions people in uni, but they look at your WAM and your other degree and so on. And that's right. If you don't have a Commonwealth supported place, then assistance is available, through fee help. So the question, I'm a lawyer in public service looking at further qualifications. If you're already a lawyer, if you already have a Bachelor of Law degree, the JD, you're better off doing a Master of Laws. And we offer a Master of Laws, an LLM. That would be a better qualification for you rather than doing a Juris Doctor, which is going to be doubling up on your earlier qualification. So if you already have a law degree, and that's why I actually did a Master of Laws for that reason. When I was already working as a lawyer, I wanted to, improve my career prospects, or, at that particular time, a Master of Laws, a coursework Master of Laws would be the better bet. Question from Eddie about the colours. I have absolutely no idea. Sorry. I can't help you with that. Paul's question is, lying a crime? Well, no. Apart from in specific circumstances, if you lie under oath on a stat dec or an affidavit, or obviously whilst giving evidence in court, well, yes, that's a crime. That could be perjury. Lying to the police in certain very limited circumstances can be a crime. But otherwise, in general, lying in itself is not. The crime of fraud is obtaining a benefit by deception. So if you lie in order to then, and by that lie, obtain a benefit, like your classic scam, right? You phone someone up and you tell them a lie in order to find out, to get them to transfer your money online. Well, that's a crime because that's fraud. But lying in itself is not a crime, no. And yes, as if politicians are going to make lying itself a crime, who would be the first to suffer? Okay, lectures in the evenings or on weekends if it's face-to-face learning. Okay, so good question. I'm pleased somebody asked that. Thank you, Sam. There are, and it's changing coming out of the pandemic, and touch wood, my desk, that pandemic stays good and we continue on the right trajectory. There are some units, we call subjects units. Some units have a live lecture, which you can attend, but is also recorded. So you don't have to attend the lecture. You can just watch the video, right? And the PowerPoint slides are all part of the video. Our lecture theatres are all set up with all whiz-bang equipment. And when I stand up to talk in a live lecture theatre, it's all, this camera is all automatically recording. Some units will only have pre-recorded lectures. Now, then there's tutorials, right? There's also tutorials, which is a small group discussion. Now, for the tutorials, you have two options. You can either be each week on campus, and that suits some people. We try and get them into particular days, mainly Wednesdays, so that you can do all your tutes on one day. Or you can do evening online tutorials, which are fortnightly. Right? So you can either be on campus weekly or online fortnightly for those tutorials. Now, the fortnightly ones go for 2 hours, as you might expect, because the weekly ones are 1 hour on campus. So you have that option. Before pre-pandemic, we were only on campus, but now we've all learned how to be innovative and teach online, like tonight. We have online tutorials that replaced, we used to have for external or distance students, we used to have a 2-day intensive on campus where you came and did all the tutorials in 2 days. And that was really hard work and honestly exhausting for everybody. But also you had to do 2 days before, we're only halfway through the lectures. It was never really worked. So the fortnightly online tutorials are much better. You can be anywhere in Australia, anywhere in the world and do those, and that's fine. No, 4 units is full-time, not 3. How hard would it be for someone to turn Australia into a one-party system? Well, hopefully reasonably difficult. I'd be marching out there in the streets, I have to tell you. But it depends who people vote for. And if people had a majority in Parliament, they can change the law to whatever they want. Perk of studying with 18-year-olds, you feel 18 again? Yeah, I've got to tell you, I teach them and I don't feel 18 when I do it. I don't feel 18. It's nothing quite like doing that to make you feel old when they say things like, back in your day. No, thanks, mate. Wasn't that long ago. Yes, lying in the context of defamation, though defamation is generally civil rather than criminal. No, Macquarie does not offer practical legal training, PLT. You can do it through the College of Law easily. They offer online. Oh, that's questions been answered. All right, and I'm out of questions. So, unless anybody has any more, and remember, of course, if you think of a question later tonight or tomorrow, you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, you can email me. Okay. Otherwise, we can probably wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. I enjoy talking about this stuff, as you can probably tell. It's always quite fun for me. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully, I might see some of you next year in my unit, Laws 8002 Criminal Justice.